Okay, so this is week 2 of our class, our first full week. These are our week 2 assignments from the assignments page. Our normal schedule is going to be that you're going to get your reading done and post to discussion by Friday. Then you're going to have until Sunday to do your response to discussion and your journal. We're going to sign up for blogs this week and we'll start them in 2 weeks. This week we have 3 readings. One from a website called Brain Pickings. They're from the diaries of some famous writers. And we have 2 diary excerpts from Anne Frank and Anne Lamott. One is very old and was written by a teenage girl. The other is from 2009 and was written by a grandmother. So it'll be interesting to read these 2 excerpts side by side. They're both examples of what I would call the traditional diary. This is what most people think of as a diary. It's a place where you write down anything that's on your mind, including your life story, your day-to-day concerns, your thoughts, your feelings. Think of your diary as a trusted friend. You can even give it a name like Kitty, as Anne does. So it's a good idea to date your entries, and if there's a gap, if you're not doing it every day, maybe put August 22nd to August 29th. Anne Lamott does this, and so does Anne Frank. And your future you reading the diary will appreciate that, I think. Okay, so narration is going to be a prominent writing strategy in a journal. And that's the telling of a story or a series of events. A narrative can unfold in chronological order, where you start at the beginning and then tell the next thing and the next thing until you get through the story. You can do that in reverse chronological order, where you start at the end and talk about how you got there. And sometimes you can start in the middle. The formal name for that is in medias res. And usually when we start in the middle, it's at a dramatic moment, like during a bank robbery. And then maybe we flash back and work our way up to that moment, and then we tell the rest of the story. When you're narrating, it's a good idea to use time transitions to guide the reader. In 2011, when I was 8, after the tornado. And it's also a good idea to mix scene and summary. A scene is something that's drawn out with a clear setting and something happening. Scenes in written works often have dialogue to show tension. Summary will cover a longer period of time more quickly. In high school, I took AP Bio. I loved my French teacher. I hated gym. Scenes are usually chosen for dramatic moments in fiction or published nonfiction. I recommend that you experiment with both scene and summary in your journal, just because, you're doing these to help you as a writer, so you should be able to include both the scene and summary. Some ways to make your writing more effective, whether you're in scene or summary, are descriptive details. And to choose your details, you want to use specifics and get some concrete nouns. A car, for example, is a concrete noun, but it's not very specific. Consider the difference between car, which could be many, many different kinds of cars, to a silver blue Prius with a peace sign bumper sticker. So this second version is going to give you a clear image to picture and maybe tell you something about the person who owns the car. Maybe they care about the environment. Maybe they're a little bit of a hippie. Sensory details are another way to help your reader get in the moment and understand the experience that you're writing about. So the sticky menu, the smell of frying onions, the scraping sounds from the griddle, the blue vinyl booth, the juicy, salty burger when you finally get to take a bite. So again, this captures the experience of a certain kind of restaurant. Probably most of us have been at this kind of restaurant. Maybe on a road trip, maybe on a Friday night after going out, maybe when you're really hungry for a really good burger. Anyway, sensory details will engage your reader and help them get more than just the diner out of what they're reading. People, you also want to capture people, whether you're in scene or summary. Physical characteristics, you don't want to overdo, but you can capture what somebody's like by noting things like size or hair color or eyes, get those distinguishing characteristics. And then other things are typical actions or actions that come up in response to events you're describing. My mother's sigh of disappointment. My husband's anxious foot tapping. Clothing or other personal items can really capture somebody's style or personality. Things like a crisp white shirt, a loose cotton dress, Joey's old red backpack slung over both shoulders. Again, all of these give us a little bit about who a person is. Facial expressions. The scowls and the glares and the eye rolls and the smiles and the dimples and the pearly whites. All of these can show somebody's reactions. I also show their personality a bit. And dialogue, and here I'm not necessarily talking about a full scene, a full conversation, but just somebody's dialogue can, again, tell us who they are. The best meal she's ever had, my grandmother said, which is always the case, except when it's the worst thing she's ever eaten. And this is what we might call referred dialogue. Dialogue that you're talking about something that somebody says and not the explicit kind. This is the explicit kind where you use quotation marks, the formal kind. Not today, my mother said, in a tone that made it clear it would not be any day in her lifetime. Both of these are fine. Both of these are used in published writing, and you can play around with them in your journal if you are so inclined. You also want to include feelings and insights in your narration or descriptions, whatever you're writing about. You can talk about what you had for lunch, and maybe you can talk about how it made you feel guilty or powerful, or how the diner was the perfect place for your self-loathing. Okay, so in fiction, sometimes there's a preference for just showing these things and not going into too much detail and explanation, because you want readers to be able to interpret and feel smart when they read. But in personal writing and journals, you do want to include feelings. You can also show and tell feelings and insights and emotions, reactions. And that's one of the reasons why we keep journals, to understand our emotions and our relationships and the emotions of others. So include them, elaborate on them. That's what your journal is for. Here's an example, and this is from a novel, but it's a novel in the form of a journal. So this is a short passage. Or I would help Rita make the bread, sinking my hands into that soft, resistant warmth which is so much like flesh. I hunger to touch something other than cloth or wood. I hunger to commit the act of touch. Margaret Atwood is the author of this novel, which is called The Handmaid's Tale. The Handmaid's Tale, again, is written as a journal, even though it's a novel. And it's set in a fundamentalist future society in which strict rules surround sexuality. And our narrator, known as Offred, lives a life without her husband, family, or friends. She could be executed for engaging in illicit behavior, or she could be sent to a colony to clean up toxic waste. So she's not touching anybody. She's not really allowed to. And this little passage really captures this feeling of hunger for touch. And some of the ways Atwood does that is phrases like sinking my hands and soft, resistant warmth. And again, this shows Offred's hunger, and it shows it in a way that simply stating that she was hungry for touch does not. I know it makes me want to put my hands in some bread dough and maybe have some fresh baked bread. Some people might go in another direction, but with me it's all about the bread. Okay, and notice too the rhythm of the second sentence, which lists the objects which Offred can touch, like furniture and clothing, which are not warm and yielding like flesh or bread dough, and how this passage lingers on the idea of touch and on the idea of hunger. It's really so well done. Atwood is such a master. I highly recommend that you read some of her work. Okay, so what are we going to do with all this newfound information about narration and description? Well, number one, I want you to pay attention to them as you read our journal excerpts. Anais Nin, in our article, is going to talk about something called living moments, and I'm stealing that term for our class. And I want you to look for living moments where the writing comes to life as you read in these two journal entries this week and in everything else you read. That'll help you to write living moments in your own work. Try and find them in your writing, but don't get stressed about it. You'll lose the freedom a journal gives you if you're worried too much, so don't worry. Try and come up with some. I'm sure you will if you're writing 1,000 words. And if 997 of them are kind of not alive and 3 of them are alive, feel proud. Again, it takes practice, it takes time, so don't get stressed. And we're going to have a little exercise this week to help you. So have fun with it and remember that it's just for practice. I'll see you in discussion.